Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now, so we're all on the same page. Mr. Lees, please characterize for us what we're about today relative to board action.
Thank you, Chairman Keough and members of the board. So to reiterate, we have now had the opportunity to receive a variety of testimony from the public and create some input. And I just want to remind the board that the direction that you provide today, and I'll speak specifically about that, the direction that you provide today will not necessarily result in action being adopted today. It means that we start a process to review all the input we have received, to review further testimony and input from the community via the Planning Commission and some things like that. And so it just starts that process. Now, the board has a couple options here. Well, they have lots of options, but basically, and this is at a high level, basically the options are, do we want to stay with status quo? Do we want to say, okay, let's give the existing current ordinance another chance for the next year, maybe increase resources within planning, within resource management to determine if we can do some additional enforcement? So certainly that would be an option, to do nothing. Another option would be to take any one of the discussion points that staff has brought forward to you this morning, whether it be indoor grows, whether it be changing to misdemeanor. We also have talked a little bit about some time frames there. You could take all or any one of those and say, this is what we want to set forward to send to the Planning Commission and hear further input and discussion on. Or you could come up with something new, say, we don't want to do any of this. We'd like to have something different. So this is your opportunity, based on the testimony that you have heard, to go forward. As it relates from the staff's point of view, we are looking for recommendations from the board to take your work forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lees. Well, to do this in an organized fashion, then, I think I'd like to call on Supervisor Baugh for comments, and then Supervisor Modi, and Supervisor Chappelle, and Ms. Giacomini. Do you want to say something now? Oh, okay, because I see you're. All right, thanks. You betcha. So, Supervisor Baugh, please.
Thank you, Chair Kehoe, and I will also extend my personal thanks to each person who took the time to come and speak today. It's very important. I do appreciate all the comments. So, Mr. Lees, I think the one thing that every person in this room is probably going to agree on is that we can't stick with the status quo, because there are challenges, whether you are a medicinal pot user and grower, or whether you are living next to a grow and you're upset and you don't want to have that continue. Folks on both sides of it are not happy with the outcome of our original ordinance, and I've heard people ask for some improvements and changes. The huge question is, and I will frankly tell you very transparently, the question is what do we do? What is our path forward? And I don't have. I have not reconciled a true path forward today. I'm just going to share my comments, ask my questions, and I'm going to also listen then to each of the other 4 members of this board, and perhaps we can collectively, no pun intended, come up with a path forward. So I do have a number of questions, then I'll make some observations. Mr. Cruz, and please don't take anything from my order of questions. They're just questions here. The current suggestion on the table, should this board be inspired to move forward and recommend some changes that would go through the planning process and then perhaps back to us, envisions a ban on outdoor grows. So I want to start there, because that's the big picture that's been presented to us. We heard it from a planning perspective, what the process is, but I'd like to know from a legal perspective. We have an ordinance, and by the way, for the record, I did not vote for the ordinance that we have now. I voted against it. I did not think it was restrictive enough or well refined enough. I expected that it would result in literally tearing the county apart, no matter what side you were on, and so I did not support it and did not vote for it. I didn't think it would accomplish anything. The current suggestion, while I think you guys did an amazing job of listening to the board, because we asked you to come back with creative solutions, so I thank you for that. You've done exactly what you were asked to do. Possibly, the indoor growing only and the outdoor ban would swing that pendulum too far the other way. So I want to ask from a legal basis, where you think that puts the county, should we decide to adopt that thought, or at least resolve to send it on to planning and to the Planning Commission. And if there is a legal basis that you considered when you made the suggestion. Because if I understand correctly, as Mr. Lees has presented, this is kind of a collection of several of our departments, legal and planning and administrative and so on and so forth, to get us here today, public health. So if we'll start there, and then I'll go on to the next question.
Thank you, Supervisor Baugh. To be brief, we have had trod, of course, this path somewhat before with our current ordinance that's in existence. And just to reiterate for the two new board members as well, there is a lot of legal activity in this area. There have been some recent Court of Appeal decisions which have said, in not so many words, that state law does not create a broad right to use marijuana without hindrance or inconvenience, or that they have an unfettered right to cultivate anywhere they choose. So with that backdrop in mind, and courts so far have upheld various types of regulations in that regard. Of course, there is some, it's not completely settled. The California Supreme Court is currently considering an issue involving a municipality's ban on dispensaries. There's also a pending decision, which we're all waiting to see come down, involving Tehama County's cultivation ordinance from the Court of Appeal, which should be coming down either in January or February, which will also provide some guidance in these areas. As has been indicated, there are various cities and or counties that have put bans on outdoor grows of outdoor cultivation of medical marijuana. The city of Anderson is one. Theirs was challenged back in 2011, went to the Superior Court. Superior Court upheld the ordinance. That doesn't mean, of course, that this ours wouldn't be challenged. In all, I would expect, in all likelihood, if we did go forward, there probably would be a legal challenge. So I do bring that to the board's attention. But it's not something that is completely without precedent. There are ones out there that have them in place, and they have so far survived the legal challenges that were presented at that time. Of course, every case is different. We'll just have to see what moves forward. But with that in mind, the short answer is this is an area that's in flux. There is support for it. It does appear to be supportable based upon the information that we have at this time, bearing in mind that as cases are developed, things may change.
One of my challenges, as I stated earlier, there really was very little teeth to the ordinance that we have now, and it makes it difficult to enforce. We've also heard testimony about the resource side of it. We simply don't have the resources to enforce it well. But from the teeth part of it, can you tell us the difference between what's your thought process with the current suggestion and compare it to our existing ordinance? I'd just like to know. Mr. Simon attempted to answer that, and I'm not sure that it was as clear as it might be from a lawyer.
Well, sure. One of the issues that was being proposed with the resolution of intent was to make the violations misdemeanors. Now, to clarify that a little bit for the board's information, under our current Shasta County Code, and let me back up a little bit more to that, under state law, any violation of a county ordinance is a misdemeanor pursuant to state law, unless this board by ordinance classifies it as an infraction. An infraction is also a type of crime, but it's obviously a much lower crime. Under the current county code, therefore, it states that any violation of the county code, any violation, first violation is an infraction, second violation is an infraction, and then the third violation and ongoing thereafter in a 12-month period is a misdemeanor. So that's already in the county code as well. So certainly right now as it exists, every third and ongoing violation of our current ordinance is a misdemeanor. What's being proposed is to basically remove the two first violations as infractions so that it's punishable as a misdemeanor from the first violation. By doing that, the idea is that that will also allow for an increase in the fines from that standpoint. With a misdemeanor, the fine can be $1,000. And with the, as opposed to an infraction, and I'm sorry, I don't have that information right here in front of me, but it's like around $100 or $200, something like that, and I can find that information for you. So that's the idea behind that. We've had some discussions also with the district attorney's office, and I don't want to speak for them, but certainly with that as being a misdemeanor and whatever resources they may have available to assist in prosecuting those types of claims.
Is there a multiplication factor to the fines?
Yes. Under our current ordinance that exists, it states that every violation, there's a violation is registered per day. So it's, you can conceivably have a fine imposed per violation per day, which could increase pretty drastically depending upon how the time period that's involved.
And then the other thought I asked from Mr. Simon was the time frame required for enforcement. The answer I received was between 6 and 8 weeks. I did meet with our legal counsel yesterday, and I asked him the same question, and you had a differing opinion. So I'm wondering, unless I misunderstood you, I'm wondering what I'm hearing.
Well, I think, I don't think there's necessarily a difference with Mr. Simon's assessment, because Mr. Simon is including, of course, the time that it takes his department to gather all the evidence, and I can't speak for that. But once it comes to our department and we're ready to go forward with it, with the evidence, and we're comfortable with it, we can then issue a notice of violation, as Mr. Simon indicated. And the goal, as we've been discussing, I've had conversations with our Senior Deputy County Counsel who handles code enforcement primarily. He believes a 30-day time period from notice of violation to hearing would be a doable process and would probably be consistent with due process.
Thank you. Then I'll just make a couple observations and perhaps another question or two and then yield the floor. One interesting comment, and I wrote down the presenter's name, but I don't have it in front of me here without searching for it. Not important. Are we advertising in Shasta County? You guys, this is my time, or our time, to address our staff. So I'm not asking the audience here. Are we advertising in Shasta County to ask people to help with code enforcement here?
I don't have any direct knowledge of that. I can't say yes or no.
Well, I'll go to Mr. Lees then. Mr. Lees, are you aware
No,
of it?
I have no direct knowledge of advertising.
Well, I know we do a lot of stuff through our public health department.
Right.
And if I'm assuming that if that's what's being heard, would you be willing to put that down as an item we can clarify and bring back to a future board meeting? I would like to know the answer to that.
Although I just made eye contact with our Director of Public Health, and she has assured me they have not been advertising that
So
either.
Shasta County is not paying for advertisement that you're aware of?
Correct.
Doesn't mean there isn't advertising out there, but
Correct.
Shasta County
Correct.
has not initiated it.
Correct.
Okay. Another question was asked, and Mr. Lees, this may be a question for you. There was reference made to the amount of money, and they are extremely large amounts of money that we spend in the public health arena. Tell me about those dollars and whether they could or could not be used for code enforcement or for compliance issues here.
The majority of the dollar revenue that public health receives are usually subject to the requirements of the grants that they've received those dollars from, whether they be federal or state. And typically, I would say that probably 95% of it couldn't be used for something like code enforcement. Now, I say typically because those things change often. And so it's always worth looking at and continuing to pursue. But in the case of the grant that was mentioned here, those dollars could not have been utilized. It's not like we discretionary general fund dollars where we could do whatever we want with them.
And for I would note just for the public, the money that we spend in our sheriff's department and in our planning department, in general, the planning department is self-sustaining, but we do commit some general fund money, but to the sheriff's department, mostly general fund money, and that is not the type of dollars that you heard presented. I guess I would also say then, for future information, as we're collecting information, I would like to know if there is a public health arena for financing to help with code enforcement. Because there are more dollars there than in our general fund. And if there was some avenue, it might answer part of the challenge we have in resources. Another thing that was brought up, it was suggested, and Mr. Cruz, maybe this is for you, it was suggested that we embrace it and tax it. In my understanding, how do we tax something that is not supposed to be sold, but is supposed to be used in a cooperative way through people growing it and giving it and helping their neighbors? How do you tax something of that nature?
To be honest, Supervisor Ball, that's an area that I have not yet researched. I do know that there are municipalities that have some taxing in relation to it, but I have not had an opportunity to research that completely, so I'm not able to answer your question at this time.
And I'm content with leaving it there if we don't have an answer, but I guess it's another question. And I think that's the best thing from the presentations we heard today, is I've ended up with a lot of questions. I would like to know the answer to that.
That is an area that's continuing to be challenged also. That you run into this conflict of there's still some federal laws that prohibit this type of activity, whether it's being enforced or not, it's on the books. And so that's why you don't see, that's one of the reasons you don't see, agricultural departments getting involved with regulating this as a corn or as any other crop, because it's still shown as an illegal substance on the federal side. And so that gets into part of the problem as it relates to what are you taxing? What exactly are you taxing? And so, and again, some municipalities have taken that leap, and of course some states have also.
One other item I'll mention while I have the floor is whatever path forward this body takes, I would like us to take a look at the form that we have for filing a complaint. It seems more complex than necessary. It calls for an AP number, which is a little more difficult for the average person to attain. It seems like it would make more sense if it was simply an address. So here's my tentative conclusion. The word balance keeps coming to mind. I believe there are legitimate needs for medical marijuana. I am moved by some of the testimony, and I believe that there are folks that benefit, and I'll take them at their word. On the other side of that balance question, there are massive, massive challenges in Shasta County. And if you're in the medical marijuana arena, you want to believe that everybody is complying and is great. But the real truth is that that's not the case. We heard that compliance is about 15% and noncompliance is about 85%. So it's out of balance. We have a huge challenge. That's the problem with what we're addressing. We need to find a path forward that addresses the legality of it, but at the same time protects the average citizen out there that has, and you've heard me present before, I can give you case after case after case of literally neighborhoods that have been assaulted with rifles and guns, roads that have been closed off, and people that have lived in the same house for 40 years, now surrounded by 9 grows, and they cannot walk outside of their home safely. Seniors, the testimony is from the public, not from me. You heard at the last meeting, people who are now considering in their late 70s having to move from that neighborhood to a safer neighborhood, which I'm not sure where that's at. The challenges are huge. In my flight over Shasta County, I did see a lot of backyard grows with a few plants in small neighborhoods. But by far, the average grow was massive out there. They're huge. A lot of people that have turned this into an industrial business in the backyard of their home. I do not accept that. I am not willing to accept that moving forward. And that's what causes us to want to look at tightening up the restrictions and finding a path forward. It's not right. This was never intended to be a neighborhood business. But it has become about money. It has become about money more so than about medical use. Whatever path forward we take, I am absolutely convinced that we need to find a way to fund those dealing with the issue. I don't have the answer as to where that money comes from, Mr. Lees, and I'm looking at you because I'd like you to dip into your Magic County general fund pocket and come up with the finances, but we cannot expect county staff or departments to be able to carry out the will of the Board of Supervisors without giving them the financial ability to do so. And with that, I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Supervisor Baugh. Supervisor Modi, followed by Supervisor Chappelle.
Thank you, Chairman. Supervisor Ball, thank you for the clarification. I also wanted to address the issue about the grant dollars and stuff, and I think that's just like some of the audience members mentioned that this board needs to become more educated on medical marijuana, and the same goes for our citizens. They need to be more educated on our budget process and what limits we have sometimes. It'd be nice to take different monies and use in different places, but we're not allowed to do that for a number of different reasons. And also, I also had the same question about the commercials, whatever they were mentioning. I'm curious to find out what that is because, I mean, I haven't seen it on after any of the news channel stuff. I record them, I watch them every day, and I haven't seen that. So if it's out there, I'm curious where that's coming from. And the other comment I had was to one individual who, and I mean this sincerely, and I think she did too. She said that, trying to deal with the medical marijuana and make it okay for people who need it, I think in some way would take care of the cartel problem or the gangster problem like that, and she said we know how to get rid of them. We can do that. And quite frankly, if you do, I would ask you to talk to our sheriff because he'd like to know how to do that, as would most of his board members. I'm not convinced it's quite that easy, but in the interest of being open, if someone has some suggestions on how to get cartels out of Shasta County, that'd be great. So to the issues here, I think what I heard today was on a number of occasions where people think that we're somehow stepping in to debate, change, regulate medical marijuana in the sense of whether it's legal or not legal or whether it's good or bad. And I don't think that's the discussion today. The discussion today is more about the zoning issues and our zoning ordinance. So we can debate all we want about whether it's legal in California versus the feds and stuff, but as we know, it's the law of the land in California. I think as Supervisor Baugh indicated, I totally agree with the issue here is balancing the rights of the people of Shasta County and its citizens. Prop 215 passed in California in 1996 with a 56% vote of the people of California. It did not pass in Shasta County. It failed with a 59% against it. So when you ask us to balance the rights, your rights for medical marijuana, you have to realize we're trying to balance it with the other 59% of the people in Shasta County who did not want it. And that's why this is so difficult. It is a balancing act between what people want on both sides of the equation, and it's so narrow, the margin, that it makes it very difficult. I was disheartened but not surprised that our compliance rate is 15%. And I suspect that a majority of the people who are here today who spoke are probably in that category. They're trying to follow the rules to grow their marijuana to use in a way that's responsible. But the problem is that you're just like they always say, one bad apple. In this case, it's 85 bad apples in the barrel, are ruining the reputation of everybody else as far as trying to comply. And a number of people spoke, and I agree with them that the issue is coming up is these people, whoever they are destroying the rights of the other people in our county to live in a way that allows them to have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That they can go out and enjoy their backyard. That they can be have that recreational time and stuff. I know of a number of people who will not go outside anymore because of the marijuana grows that are too close. It's just too much for them. And you can make the comments that, well, roses smell and gardenias smell, and that's true. I mean, I've got a gardenia plant in my house, in my yard, but I have to get within about maybe 10 feet of it before I smell it. I can smell marijuana from half a mile away if it's a big enough grow. Now, again, maybe not a small grow. And you can, and some people are chuckling, that's fine, but I just tell you, I've been in places where you can smell it. So it does affect people's right to have enjoy their yard and their property. I think the biggest problem that we need to have, one of the biggest issues I see here is we need to speed up our process of how we handle our issues as far as compliance and enforcement, Mr. Lee. So I think one of my biggest concerns is that if we have people who are out of compliance, we need to have a better process that's faster and gets to the issue quicker so we can resolve these issues and try to take care of it rather than spend all this time and then coming 4 months after the fact. There were several people who mentioned on, I guess, both sides of the issue that we need to have maybe a committee come together and work on these issues. I support that. I think we should do that. We should try to develop a group of citizens from different aspects who can come together, and maybe they can debate how this can be a balanced act and find some answers that they can make it livable for both sides of the equation here. I think as Supervisor Baugh said, medical marijuana, it's here, it's the law. There are certainly a number of people who believe they benefit from it, and as Supervisor Baugh said, I will take their word at that if they believe it helps them. And I think if those who are complying with that, we should help them find a way to do that. So to the last issue, to move forward, I think at this point, I'm not necessarily in favor of trying to make totally in-house grows for the small gardens. I think that's going to be very difficult. A lot of people talked about that. If they are complying, if they are down to the 6 or 10 plants or whatever it is, it's going to be very expensive to have an indoor grow. But we got to find a way to, as someone else mentioned, someone lives there, but they got recommendations for 6 other people. Maybe find some way to say, you know what, you got to live there for your place or something. So you can't have 20 people growing in one small neighborhood. Maybe we need to find a better way to control the larger grows, or maybe not. Maybe just get rid of the larger grows. Maybe we just said, hey, it's the 100 square feet, and that's it. I don't care if you have half an acre or 400 acres. And that way, maybe we'll allow our law enforcement to look at some areas and say, you know what, that's obviously well beyond the ordinance, and so that's a criminal prosecution, and we'll just go after him criminally or something. I don't know. Maybe there's a way to do that to allow the sheriff to be able to recognize very easily versus coming in there and trying to measure, okay, is this how many acres and this is how many square feet or something. And then I think this committee also needs to figure out how you're going to address the issue of the odor that is affecting all the people who live around it. I don't know if I'm open to any answers you have, but I suspect that's one of the major issues that people complain about. And the other issues that have been alerted to already is the safety of the neighborhood. A lot of people are very concerned about who's showing up in their neighborhood. Maybe the small users here are using, just small, aren't having that problem, but a lot of these places are having people who are showing up at properties armed to try to think because either going to take the marijuana or they think they got cash there or whatever it is, and so a lot of times they show up at the wrong house, and that is a fact. It's happening, and citizens are very concerned about their personal safety. So those are my recommendations at this point.
Thank you, Supervisor Modi. Supervisor Chappelle, followed by Supervisor Giacomini.
Thank you, Chairman Kehoe. Supervisor Modi, I'm in agreement with a lot you said, and I'm impressed with what you had talked about. It's that those issues are of utmost concern also. I try and analyze this thing. We have several problems, and trying to come to a solution, and a balanced solution is not an easy solution. Okay. We have the youth, and like I said earlier, I'm dead opposed to the youth. I have to address my colleague, Supervisor Baugh. He mentioned something about a paper article as we were off taking our break, and where I'd advocated that I felt that indoor use was the answer, but that was taken out of context on something. I said that was a possibility. But what I was actually addressing with her was I was addressing the more of the criminal aspect of 50, the 90 plants that have been grown, and where those were my concerns. Okay, so I think we have the youth, and like I said earlier, and I think somebody else, one of the speakers, condoned what I was talking about. It does have detrimental effects in growing, in their process of growing older and older, and before their brain actually matures into an adult brain, it can cause some detrimental health issues and also thinking problems, so forth, for the rest of their life. I think that what's happened with marijuana is that because it's become the 215 card, it's kind of gives somebody the freedom to say this is okay. The youth have picked up on it and said this is okay for us also. We do regulate alcohol with age requirements, and maybe that's a possibility that we could do with the youth, because it's not a freeway for them, and it's not an avenue for them to be able to just say, oh, this is okay, because now a lot of people are growing it anyways, and it's a fine drug. It's not. It's a very mentally handicapped drug for youth. The prescriptions, that's why I wanted to ask about the prescriptions, because we have a problem with the prescriptions. Obviously, we've talked about it. The doctors don't even put an amount on there. And so when you can grow 99 plants or whatever you can do, I mean, it gives somebody a field day. They go out and borrow somebody, either rent a property or buy some property and grow. Amount, as far as I'm concerned, is abusive, okay? And that's where a lot of these problems are stimulating. We have a problem of the illegal grows, like I was saying earlier, because of the prescriptions. So I think we need to address the illegal grows as compared to the legal grows. Now we have the problem of smell in neighbors, okay? And quite frankly, this is not, and it would be nice that if I could pull it out of the box and say we have an answer to this. Here it is, we're going to spray this with Febreze, and we won't have that problem anymore. So there's not. So I'm advocating that we do a community advisory board. I'm advocating that we try to come to some conclusions. Like I said earlier, everybody's not going to be happy with the decisions, but we need to come to a decision. For myself, I think plant limitation. I think that if people are abusing the grow area, I think that the penalties need to come down harder. That keeps the legal aspect, or the cuspus of operating on the legal aspect, toned down quite a bit, because if they lose their 215 card on their first violation, they're not going to risk that, okay? For me, with the resolution we got in front of us, I don't really think that it resolves a problem. I think it may actually add to a problem. I would have a recommendation that we table this until we can come up with a solution that we can actually, when we have the resolution, it has the avenue that we can actually legally pursue to stop what we have that's illegal, and that we can actually curtail smaller growths that are actually larger growths, if that makes any sense. So the people are actually growing for themselves, or in compliance with what we say and we address that's going to work for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Chappelle. Supervisor Giacomini.
Thank you, Chairman Kehoe. I agree with much of what has been said here. I think the status quo is not working. I think that's very clear. It is an issue of compliance, assisting our staff in making sure that we can get compliance with whatever we choose to move forward with. And then balance. It is an issue of balance. So the committee idea was talked about from both sides, and I think we really need to explore that. And so, Mr. Lees, can you explain, would that be something that would occur at the Planning Commission level?
I would think that what I'm hearing, and certainly it could take place at any level you would like it to, or direct it to. But from what I'm hearing, I think we're talking about an advisory committee that would be in addition to the Planning Commission. So we wouldn't be using the Planning Commission for that. It'd be advisory committee made up of community members to help make recommendations to where we create the balance that you're speaking of. And so, does that answer your question? I'm not, it would be, certainly it would be a Brown Act committee, it'd be at the direction of the board, so it would be, any member of the public could attend whenever they want, whenever it took place. It'd be open to the public, and so that would invite lots of participation, which is probably what you're looking for.
Would we have budget ability to put something like that together, or how would that be funded?
It would be funded from our discretionary dollars out of our general fund.
Okay. And we would, obviously have to have support staff
Right.
for that, and we have enough.
Right. It just whenever you're talking of, we don't have extra dollars, so whenever you're talking about taking it from somewhere else or stretching something else to make that happen. But certainly if that was the will and direction of the board, we'd absolutely do that.
Okay. And I mean, I think we struggle with that constantly. We hear from Mr. Simon and Sheriff Basinko, they are short-staffed, and it's difficult to deal with the compliance issues because of the lack of funding.
Right.
So, one final question for you. Have we done coordination with the cities on their ordinances? Have we had a discussion at that level?
We offline, the city managers and myself have met to talk about these different things. The problem arises, number one, there's different circumstances because of the ruralness of the area or not. The other is the amount of liability one wants to take on, and the cities and counties aren't always in agreement as far as what they believe to be the right path forward. So in answer to your question, no formal meetings have taken place. I think there is merit in that in some areas, in that certainly you have an ability to be consistent. But there are different circumstances too. So.
Right. Okay, I might suggest that would be one component of the committee aspect, is, have folks at that level discuss their ordinances and maybe try to find some consistency, or, acknowledge where the differences should exist. So essentially, I'm sorry, I'm not done yet.
Please.
I think I'm hearing we really need to work on the balance. We really need to have the committee formed, I believe, and look at the size limitation, toughen up those penalties a little bit more, removal of the 215 card at immediate, where you're outside of the limits. That's intriguing. That's an intriguing thought. So anyway, I think we need to move forward. I would not support tabling it at this time. I think we need to move forward in some manner. So thank you, Chairman Kehoe.
Thank you. County Council, you had an observation?
Yes, just very briefly in response to Supervisor Giacomini's inquiries about the proposed community advisory board. If it is the board's direction, I think it may be also helpful and maybe get input from planning as well, as far as what would be the scope of the issues that board would be looking at. But if one of them is, of course, is proposed zoning changes, that board cannot take the place of the planning department and the planning commission. Those are required by statute, and there's a whole process that goes through as far as that process. So I just wanted to make that clear. And of course, all these things can certainly be explored. But just for the board's information, there may be some limits that exist as far as being able to remove a medical marijuana card. As far as that goes, those are more state law things as opposed to areas of zoning, which clearly fall within this board's purview. I'm not saying it can't be, but we'd have to look at it more closely.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. I appreciate that clarification. So the committee, my concept for the committee would be have the good minds that presented to us today talk about what are some options, what's that range of options, and then obviously any zoning issues would need to go to the Planning Commission and then move forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, for me, the summary of our discussion today, both at the board level, staff level, and all of your comments, is simply this. I believe that we have a quest for community equilibrium in this matter. I believe that we share a quest for equity and fairness in resolving this and charting a direction for us as a county. For me, the first step is to, and maybe it's already been done, but I would like to see for the board an analysis of the present system, the ordinances we have in place, where they have succeeded and where they have failed. I would also like to see in the suggestion of staff this morning what the expected outcomes would be if we implement or modify our ordinances. I'm not totally convinced that the suggestion is going to get us to where we want to go. In some regards, it may be draconian. It may not be. I don't have enough information, and I think that's an observation that's shared by all of my colleagues. I do see value in forming an ad hoc committee to share some perceptions with us. But as my colleagues have said, that committee in and of itself must be balanced, must be objective. And we can't allow one side or the other to dominate on that committee. And it should be clearly understood that that committee would be advisory in its very nature, either advisory to the board or to the planning commission or to other. The other thing I think is critically important is we need to talk about accountability. We need to talk about what our expectations are for the people that are going to be involved in enforcing the ordinances, whatever they may be. It's critically important that we provide them with the resources to do their job in an efficient and effective fashion. Finally, I'd like to talk about an incongruity that seems pretty conspicuous to me, and Supervisor Giacomini brought it up. And it's simply this. We work with the cities on tax sharing, on air resources, economic development. This is so important to us as a community. It seems to me that we need to bring them into the picture. And I know there may be some structural difficulties to that, Mr. Lees, but after all, there are a large number of people that live in the cities vis-a-vis in the unincorporated area. So I share with my colleagues the desire to move ahead in an expeditious fashion. And at this point, let's entertain some sort of motion as to how we chart our future. Mr. Cruz.
Just very briefly in connection with entertaining a motion, the issue of a advisory committee, of course, is not on the board's agenda today. So if that is something that the board would want to consider, the motion would be to have staff bring back for a future board meeting a proposal concerning that sort of a committee.
Okay, let's do this incrementally then. Is there a motion to ask staff to put together a report on an ad hoc advisory committee?
So moved.
You second,
A
Bill?
second, yeah.
Okay. Is there a discussion?
Yeah, I just would want to, I think, clarify, I think, as I believe you did, Supervisor Keough, is that it should be an advisory committee. It should be not part of the planning commission per se. It's the advisory to the planning commission. I think it should be, their work should be done in advance before stuff goes to the planning commission, at least initially. And then maybe the planning commission might refer stuff back to them for further, work and stuff. The one concern I do have is it's typical anytime you have committees involved, this will not get our problems solved before the next growth season. I mean, it's just flat out will not happen. I mean, you're talking several months and it'll be way too late. So just have to recognize that's going to leave our enforcement people in a tough spot.
Supervisor Chappelle?
Thank you, Chairman Kehoe. One of the things that was brought up with my colleagues is that maybe include the cities. The only thing that I can think of currently is that Anderson is outlawed outdoor growing, so I'm not for sure how well all that's going to work. I'm wondering if we shouldn't just keep the constituency with our county, because that's what we are right now, our county, with the sheriff's department, and possibly any other type of attorneys that might be interested in the legal aspects of that. And also, what my recommendation on a committee would be, we're going to have it open, but if we had a closer committee, I would say we would limit the numbers on both sides, but we'll see how that goes.
Supervisor Baugh?
Thank you, and I think that's exactly what would happen with what I hear in the thought of a motion to refer this to staff to come back to us with a process to form the committee and create the balance. You've all heard the conversation. I think it's come equally from each member of this board, and I know that Supervisor Modi said it already and Supervisor Kehoe said it, but I'm just going to say it again. Formation of an advisory committee does not allow this board to escape its ultimate responsibility of making the decision. Any end decision, regardless of the advisory committee, will still be made by this board, period.
Thank you. Supervisor Giacomini?
Thank you, Chairman Kehoe. Just to the point of including the cities and having a discussion with them, I actually think we ought to include the cities. I mean, we could learn from what Anderson has experienced if they have, banned outdoor grows. I think we could learn something from that, and they need to be at the table and help educate us as to what direction we do need to go.
Supervisor Modi?
Yeah, well, I actually disagree with that. I think that the problem will be is you're talking about political bodies, and each have their own opinion as to what to do in all three cities in the county, and I think it's just not going to work very well to try to ask different political bodies to throw aside their political beliefs and come together. So I think actually having the cities involved is not a good idea. I think certainly if our CEO wants to talk to their managers and get some information to pass along to this committee, you could do that. But I think we could really slow down the process terribly and not get anything accomplished.
I tend to agree with Supervisor Giacomini. I think there is value in soliciting the opinions of those in city government. I understand completely your observation, and we don't want to slow this down. So maybe you, being such an effective CEO, can reach a balance point there some place. The other thing is, if we choose to establish this ad hoc committee, let's put a timeline in there. I think the observation is stalling tactics and overly lengthy discussions are not going to serve us well. People have to be disciplined, have to get their points across, and then we got to get a recommendation. So, Supervisor Baugh?
Well, just continuing our discussion, since everybody else is weighing in on the cities or no cities in the conversation, I just have, if you want to destroy any value of an actual committee, include the cities. I just have two words for you: tax sharing. Okay? We've come to a conclusion on that, I say facetiously, over the last 10-year period.
That's true. All right, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Yes,
Just
Mr.
a
Lees.
clarification, the motion that I heard, and I just want to make sure this is, the motion I heard was to have staff bring back for our next agenda the proposal of a advisory committee, and we'll also, present some ideas of what we would think that you might want to see it look like. And so that's what we'd be doing at our next board meeting, and that's it at this point. Is that
Right? Agreement?
I'll ask the guy who made the motion.
That's the motion.
Well,
Go for it.
That's your
Yes.
motion?
Yeah.
And that's my second.
We already had a motion and a second.
We were just verifying.
Oh,
was just
okay,
verifying
okay.
it,
The
yeah.
conversation.
All those in
yes, sir.
favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now, is there any other motion as to how to proceed? Supervisor Baugh?
I think we, it's been said several times that by forming the committee and seeking some additional advice, it's going to delay any possible changes in our current ordinance past the existing growing season. We still must deal with the ordinance that we have today, and we know that it's not adequate. We know there are challenges. Of those challenges, the question remains of actually, in the end, who enforces it, because we've had two different discussions. While the ordinance itself calls for one plan, at our last meeting we instructed Mr. Lees to have the Sheriff's Department be the enforcement tool, and the Sheriff has clearly said that, at least, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Sheriff, but I believe that you indicated that that was not something that you thought was wise or timely. In fact, he said that if he was given that mandate today, he would not be able to hire people in time for the current growing season. So I don't think we leave it there either. I believe that we probably, I'm just going to say this, my suggestion, we leave it in the planning arena with the Sheriff's Department as they have been when there is a need to respond, that it should involve the Sheriff's Department. But we need to find, and I don't have the answer, I think we need to direct you, Mr. Lees, to help us find a solution to the financial obstacle. So the who, I'm suggesting, would remain as it is, not turning it over to the Sheriff's Department for now, and the dollars, in consultation with the department, we need to have it come back to us if we can find those dollars. And I know that's an impossible situation with our current budget. I know that there's no money out there. If I had the answer, Mr. Lees, I would tell you where to take the money from. We made some suggestions today as to whether or not we could use public health dollars, grant dollars. Maybe that's a big fat no, but I think that's the issue
Okay.
on the table.
Other observations? Mr. Modi?
Yeah, I think we should work on speeding up the process of our ordinance. You got maybe perhaps a committee down the road working on these other issues, and I think that's great, but I think we should have a parallel track that goes back through our ordinance and see if there's better ways to put it together to make it faster and quicker to resolution rather than what we have now. And whether we change the ordinance down the road or not won't really matter. It's still, this is meant for people who are outside compliance, and we need to have a better process to make that happen. I think we should spend some time trying to fix that.
Mr. Chappelle?
I just have one. Thank you, Chairman Kehoe. Are we discussing whether we're going to vote on this resolution or not currently?
I would like to see us come to some
Come to some
conclusion on that.
Okay. As previously, my recommendation would be to table it. I don't think it's going to resolve anything. I think we're going to maybe make if we decide that we're going to go forward with this illegal outdoor growing and we make everything inside, we may create a lot of outlaws. I would like to see way more teeth. I just don't see that this is going to bring a solution to anything, and I realize then it goes to the Planning Commission, but I don't see it solving the problems that we have, and I would like to see a way more comprehensive resolution that addresses the things that we have. And if we have to even make a living document out of it, or we might want to modify it from time to time, that's fine, but I think we just need to we had to address, there's several issues here that we're talking about. I went over them previously, I don't want to do it again, but I would like to see that addressed in this, in a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Modi?
Yeah, I'm actually going to make a motion that we do adopt a resolution considering making amendments to our zoning plan so we can move forward on speeding up the process and getting that portion of it done, recognizing that there's still other work that will come afterwards. But in order to even start that process, you've got to have this resolution to move forward, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Mr. Cruz?
Yes, that's correct. If we're going to make any proposed changes to our zoning ordinance, the board needs to adopt a resolution of
So I'm going to
intent.
make a motion that we do adopt the resolution so we can work on at least the process of speeding it up.
Supervisor Giacomini?
Yes, I would second that motion.
Thank you. Further discussion of the motion?
Can we clarify the motion and the effect of it, please?
Well, my motion is just, as I mentioned before, I think we need to speed up the process of enforcement and I want staff to work on that process. I recognize that there's going to be other factors coming down the road subsequently, maybe from this committee that comes back to us perhaps, but if we don't do something now, they won't be able to start working on that, so.
I guess the clarification, I'm asking whether or not you're including it as worded in our recommendation,
Nope,
or are you making your own recommendation?
The motion I made was the one I made. not-
Correct. I just wanted to be sure. Thank you so much.
Further discussion? Mr. Lees, are we clear? Okay.
Again, it's just to work on the speeding up the process for enforcement for those who are not in compliance with our ordinance as it sits today.
Well, to clarify, the issue concerning speeding up the process is dictated by due process. And our current ordinance already does not dictate time periods. And of course, we are certainly willing to, and I've talked with Mr. Lees and whatnot as far as that process. And we are currently have already implemented plans, and Mr. Simon can attest to this as well, on trying to do that already. Just to confirm, is it the plan to create that as an ordinance?
Let me jump in here. I think if I might, thank you. If I might, what I'm hearing this motion is to instruct staff to continue working forward on some of the other nuances. We're not talking about going forward with recommending enclosures or anything like that, but what we're talking about is those other plans that we've had in discussion as it relates to maybe setting forth permanent hearing dates, maybe setting forth the time of hearings to be at a shorter period of time, and those types of things. What I would not recommend is that we include that in an ordinance. So because of that, we don't need to have that in our ordinance now, and I don't think we want to tie it up in that in the future. So what I'm hearing the motion to be, and don't let me put words in your mouth either, boss. But what I'm hearing the motion to be is to get us going on those other nuances that we were trying to do to increase enforcement. And one of the things, not limited to, I mean, those things that I just mentioned, but also, looking at ways, because I'm hearing what you're saying, to assist resource management and resources to maybe add an additional compliance officer so that we could do a faster job of ensuring enforcement or compliance.
Yeah, and that's correct. And if you don't need this resolution to do that, that'd be fine. I just know in the past, we've had some discussions about trying to change the process. It hasn't happened yet. So I'm trying to get someone to start changing the process.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Cruz, do I not need a resolution to even do that part of it?
Yes, that's correct. You don't need a resolution for that aspect of it. We have already an existing county code, completely separate from the zoning code, that has a process for nuisance abatement. It meets the statutory requirements. It's just a matter of implementing these nuances as we've discussed.
Okay, then I will change my motion to say, direct our CEO to get going.
And I would second that.
That's two, Larry, that's two.
Now, Mr. Lees, in the interest of clarity, should there be no misunderstanding for anyone in the audience or anyone watching on TV, I'd like you to characterize the effects of the motion and the second when viewed in juxtaposition with this staff report and those 7 bullet points.
Well, I think let me just clarify my motion. I think I just said that. I mean,
You're
we're not changing our current ordinance the way it stands as far as the enforcement aspects of it, of what you can and can't do. I'm just asking you to clean up the process so it goes faster.
Yeah.
I think what we've said is we're going to ask the staff to come back with a recommendation to form a committee to then address the issues that are here in the staff report. So I'm not asking for any of the stuff in here to be done at this point.
Very good. Okay. Does everyone understand that? And it's pretty clear. Mr. Supervisor Chappelle, followed by Supervisor Baugh.
Thank you, Chairman Kehoe. So we're not going to vote on this resolution currently?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Supervisor Baugh?
And in your thought process, Supervisor Modi, I heard you use the word teeth earlier. Are you still thinking, that's part of what we were looking at, is not only the time frame, but maybe a little more teeth? Is that what you don't want them to look at, increased penalties or tools of enforcement? Or you do?
I'm not sure if that's going to be solve the issue. Our concern from this last year was is everything took too long to get done, so people would give us notice of violations. By the time we got finished getting through it, prosecuting or investigating and reviewing it, it took us 8 months, and it's November, and the grows were over, and the people looking at us going, what's the whole point? And we just wasted everybody's time. So we need to change the process so we don't waste everybody's time and can get something done in a meaningful time. So that's what I'm hoping. I don't know if that have to change I don't get to change the penalties to do that.
I liked that aspect of what we saw today, and I agree with you, and I'm going to support the motion. I personally would like to have seen additional teeth and penalties within the framework of the law.
And I think that's the thing that if that committee gets formed, they should bring that back as part of their
Perhaps.
recommendations.
Perhaps.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a motion and a second. Further questions? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving us your time and your thinking today. We'll take a 2-minute break to allow you to vacate
We
the...
still haven't answered one of the questions that I have.
Oh, all right, Mr. Baugh.
Yeah, we still haven't answered the question of who's going to be enforcing this, how we're going to pay for it.
You better rein them in here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, hold up a second. We have...
Well, I'd like to come back to I'd like to come back with a recommendation, but just at a high level.
Sure.
Well, actually, what I want to do is come back at a high level as to where the revenue, come back at a different time as to where the revenue will come from. That will take a 4/5 vote from this body because we will be transferring funds. The idea I have behind that, though, in listening to today's discussion, is to allocate additional resources to resource management so they can put additional compliance officer or officers on board, and that will move the time, that will quickly increase the time frame. The other thing that it may take is also additional resources for the sheriff's office because typically obviously we're talking about the 85% of those that are growing illegally or outside, not necessarily illegally, but at least outside our ordinance. And we usually team those up with deputies. And so because of that, you're talking about additional resources to the sheriff's office also.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, we're going to take a 2-minute recess and then go into R7.